to The Fitterist Show with your host, Christopher Allen, where we explore the art of mind and body conditioning. This week, we take a look at 3 different health and wellness news stories in the headlines from the past week. Up first is a study that says that watching movies counts as light exercise. Sign me up. Next up is a study out of Denmark that examines the role of sugar relative to brain activity and how it may alter the reward center of the brain, similar to addictive drugs. And finally, we review a new study released by the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, that highlights the laziest states in the United States and the implications on obesity and overall health. Let's dive in. In the news, story number 1. This might be one of my favorite research studies of all time. In a study conducted by the University College out of London, researchers discovered that watching a movie in the movie theater can count as a, quote, light workout. So it counts as exercise. This was reported by the Times, and it allegedly states that sitting in the theater watching a movie can count as exercise, specifically a light form of cardio. So let's take a look at the methodology. First, the study analyzed the responses of 51 moviegoers while watching the 2019 live-action Aladdin remake by hooking them up to sensors which track their heart rates and skin reactions. It was determined, though, that these people remained for about 45 minutes in a healthy heart zone, which is when the heart beats between 40 and 80% of its maximum rate. This type of heart activity is comparable to someone who's engaged in a light cardiovascular exercise, such as a brisk walk or gardening. When watching a movie in a theater, you're practically forced to keep your attention on the big screen and avoid any tempting interactions from your phone or anything else. And this type of attentiveness to plot details promotes positive problem-solving development. The research was carried out by, again, the University College at London and paid for, important point, by View Cinemas. The cinema goers were compared with a group of 26 people who spent the same time sitting calmly and reading. So what does it mean being in a healthy heart zone? Well, for an average 30-year-old, this could be a heart rate between 95 and 160 beats per minute. A normal resting heart is roughly between 60 and 100 beats per minute. That same effect could be achieved by some form of light cardiovascular exercise, such as, again, brisk walking or gardening. Now, there were some additional findings from the researchers that they called out in their publication. One is togetherness. So the hearts of the people watching the film also appeared to kind of synchronize and beat in unison, along with what was going on the screen, which could create a feeling of togetherness. Next, the researchers noted that there were problem-solving skills. So as well as physical benefits, the problem-solving skills used when trying to follow a plot are a good workout for the brain. Effectively, our ability to work through problems without distraction makes us better able to solve problems and makes us more productive. And the third additional finding is in the area of sustained focus. So when you have a cultural experience like going to the cinema that has a collective experience, but also provides opportunities for our brain to devote our undivided attention for sustained periods of time. And our ability to sustain that focus and attention can play a critical role in building our mental resilience, because problem solving typically requires a concentrated effort to overcome obstacles and find solutions. So my thoughts, this one is actually a pretty interesting and entertaining story, and might actually explain why I'm pretty good at problem solving, because I had lots of movies during my formative years. But remember, it's a pretty small sample size of only 51 people, and also remember that it was funded by a theatrical cinema chain. Well, what a surprise. I'm even a little skeptical of the comparison set for what is deemed light cardio. Is gardening really light cardio? Anyway, look, I love movies, and if there are indeed peripheral benefits by going to the cinema and getting immersed in a great movie, and look, I've recently seen Knives Out, 1917, Parasite, and Little Women, and I loved all of them, then it's great. Any additional benefits you get from both a physical perspective and a mental perspective, just another great reason to see a movie. In the news, story number 2, sugar can alter the brain chemistry after only 12 days. This is a really interesting study out of Denmark that examined the effect of sugar intake on the reward circuitry in the brains of pigs. And they found that sugar intake alters the reward processing circuitry of the brain in a similar way to addictive drugs. This research may help to explain the compulsive consumption of food leading to some food addictions. To help us learn something new or experience something pleasurable, the human brain has a built-in reward system. Natural brain chemicals communicate with each other to help us learn and repeat behaviors that improve our well-being. The neurotransmitter dopamine plays a role in pleasure, motivation, and learning within that brain's reward system. However, certain substances such as drugs can hijack that brain reward system, artificially activating it, telling the brain to repeat pleasure-seeking behavior constantly as the mechanism behind addiction. So let's take a look at their methodology. So researchers examined the effect of sugar intake on the reward circuitry in the brains of pigs by analyzing the effects of sugar on 7 female mini pigs using complex imaging techniques with opioid receptor agonists and dopamine receptor antagonists to examine the animal's brain and reward systems. The team gave the mini pigs access to a sucrose solution for 1 hour on 12 consecutive days and then retook the scans 24 hours after the last sugar dose. So what were the findings? After just 12 days of sugar intake, they saw major changes in the brain's dopamine and opioid systems. The opioid system, which is that part of the brain's chemistry that is associated with well-being and pleasure, was already activated after the very first intake of sugar. The findings, say the researchers, imply that foods high in sucrose or sugar influence brain activity and reward circuitry in ways similar to those observed when addictive drugs are consumed. So the sugar had several physiological effects, and there are several reasons why it's not necessarily that healthy, because if sugar can change the brain's reward system after only 12 days, as we saw in this study with pigs, you can imagine that natural stimuli, such as learning or social interaction, are pushed into the background and replaced by sugar or other artificial stimuli. So it's an interesting study as it looks at the big business of sugar and its impact on the brain and its potential for addictive type behavior, or at least addictive type brain reward system behavior. Very interesting. Our third story today comes courtesy of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The CDC this month released its findings from a recent study on physical inactivity levels across the United States. The study, which combined data from roughly 2015 through 2018, almost 4 years, is based on telephone interviews conducted by both federal and state health officials. Now, for the purposes of this study, physical inactivity is defined as a self-reported engaging in no leisure time physical activity during the past month, so the previous 30 days. So specifically, the question asked of respondents was, during the last month, other than your regular job, did you participate in any physical activities or exercises such as running, calisthenics, golf, gardening, or walking for exercise? So the methodology for the study comes from the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. Sounds pretty governmentally-ish, but it's on the up and up. It's legit. It's an ongoing state-based telephone interview survey that's conducted by the CDCs. And although the data is self-reported, the BRFSS completes more than 400,000 adult interviews each year, making it the largest continuously conducted health survey system in the entire world. So again, the survey combines data from a nearly 4-year period from 2015 through 2018. So what were some of the findings? Remember, in these cases, lower numbers are better here as we're measuring inactivity. So, with that said, all states and territories in the United States had more than 15% of adults who were physically inactive. It's not a good sign to start with. Let's keep going. In 4 states, Colorado, Washington, Utah, and Oregon, and the District of Columbia, 15% to less than 20% of adults were physically inactive. So, a little bit, those are the best states. 24 states had between 20 and 25 of adults that physically were inactive. 15 states, 25 to 30% of adults were inactive. And in 7 states, those would be Tennessee, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Alabama, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Mississippi, and, bonus here, 2 U.S. territories, including Puerto Rico and Guam, had 30% or more of adults that were physically inactive. So those 7 are your laziest state winners. Remember, physically inactive over the past 30 days basically did nothing, nada. From a regional perspective, the South, with 28%, had the highest prevalence of physical inactivity, followed by the Northeast at 25.6%, the Midwest at 25%, and the West at 20.5%. And again, I will post the map of the U.S. inactivity levels in the show notes at www.fitterist.com/045 for episode 45, for those who would like to see more detail in a graphic format, or to just check out your state and see where it fell in the inactivity level. So my take, I suspect there's a non-trivial correlation between the states with the highest levels of obesity and the laziest states, or those with the highest levels of physical inactivity. In fact, I'm going to post both of these graphs in the show notes so you can visually see the correlation between obesity and physical activity on a state-by-state basis. Also, I think the CDC was pretty generous in their threshold question of physical activity. So it's not like the threshold was exceedingly high or anything during the past month. Did you participate in running, calisthenics, gardening, or walking? Seems pretty reasonable. Although, I do wonder if they counted watching a movie in a movie theater as light exercise from our first news story. Anyway, that's it for this week. Some very interesting studies and some interrelated studies this week. Until next time. With that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to The Fitterist Show. You can follow us on Instagram at FitteristMindBody and on Twitter at FitteristMind. If you enjoyed this episode, please send it to a friend or subscribe to make sure you don't miss any future episodes of The Fitterist Show. My name is Christopher Allen, and make it a magical day.